As planners, how can we have the confidence that the hotel will have adequate staffing levels for our event? Barbara, do you want to start on this one?
Sure. The answer to that question is that you got to go and see it for yourself. You've got to experience it for yourself, to not listen to others, to not listen to this general concern in the industry that staffing is short, but to go kick the tires, go check out the property yourself. And that might mean whether it's a planner doing that, or maybe it's a local member or someone else that might be able to go over, check on the staffing levels, check on the opening and availability of hotel services, restaurants, things like that. I think we all have come to expect that things aren't necessarily exact as we remember them in 2019, or when we last traveled potentially in early 2020. Certainly there are changes, but staffing wise, certainly banquet and event staffing, critical, obviously, hotel guest check-in, etc. And any other services, whether that's the bar, restaurant. The worst thing you could do is be slow at the bar and getting drinks. And really, I say that in the way that certainly it's a lost opportunity to make money with a lot of organizations. So really look at what the group's pain points are and have a frank, candid discussion. How is the hotel going to ramp up staffing if it's needed? How's it going to ramp up? How's it going to scale up staffing? And I'm not a big believer in putting a ton of language, if any, in the contract about it. You really have to go see it. And as we talked about earlier, once you have these discussions or you go on site and see it, then put together some commitments, then put together something in writing to confirm that. I think that's really important. And I think it's important for the group to really know its attendees, its members, what are their pain points? What are the push points? And how can the hotel staff around that to maximize, or I should say minimize, those pain points and make sure staffing is there? I think that to me is probably the best way to manage it. Lisa, I know you've obviously dealt on the other side in hotels with, as many businesses have, the challenges in getting labor back at work.
I think this is a question that really is becoming a moot point, because as I talked about at the beginning, occupancy levels are pretty much back to 2019 levels, and that means the hotel has to staff for those occupancy levels. What was happening in the fall of 21 was that occupancy was going like this, and so hotels can only staff based on occupancy. They're not going to keep everything open if they have 2 people staying in the hotel. They're not going to have full banquet staff on hand to stand around and do nothing. And actually, Barbara and I had a case where her client was very concerned about those staffing levels, and the hotel agreed to have representatives come, meet with the general manager, the housekeeping person, everybody at every level, and they would explain how they were able to staff when they suddenly had high occupancy. I don't think that's as big of an issue as it was 6 months ago, because as I said, levels are back up, occupancy levels are back high enough that hotels should be fully staffed. That doesn't mean you shouldn't have the conversation. I agree with Barbara. It's perfectly fine to go to the hotel and say, show me what's going on. What are your staffing levels? And again, I know that your occupancy right now is transient driven. What are you able to do with groups? How do you bring in banquet staff when you do have banquets? You should ask those questions and you should get answers to them. So I agree with Barbara that that's wholly reasonable. The other thing that you need to ask about is, how have things changed? Because there are things that are changing in the industry that may never go back. Some major hotels have eliminated room service, and they were either doing it right as COVID started or had planned to do it, and there may not ever be room service again. So that's something you need to ask. What services did you provide before that you're not going to have any longer? Because that may be the case. It's not necessarily COVID related. It's just the way the business is going. So I agree with Barbara. Ask those questions, but I think it's less of an issue than it was 6 months ago.
Great. Thank you, Lisa.